Good morning. I'm Mark Hamrick. I'm Washington Bureau Chief and Senior Economic Analyst with Bankrate.com, and I'm your moderator this morning. Welcome to this telecast from the National Press Club in the heart of Washington, D.C. We want to welcome all of you here in the room today, as well as those of you who are watching via whatever device it might be. It is true that we all have a stake in the job market, and there's a good reason why the monthly employment report, like the one which is due just a week from today, is the most closely followed economic report affecting both Wall Street and Main Street. While the jobless rate is at a historically low level of 4.9%, so is the labor force participation rate. That is the share of individuals either working or looking for work. So there is more work to do on a variety of fronts, particularly with the ongoing challenges of the rapid advances in technology and globalization. Among the challenges, as we'll discuss today, is bridging ongoing skills gaps. So on to our first set of introductions. We'll begin our discussion, and to do that, a couple of initial introductions are in order. To my right is Jonas Prising. As Chairman and CEO of ManpowerGroup, Jonas heads up the leading workforce solutions company serving more than 400,000 clients, employing 3.4 million people across 80 countries and territories. Jonas, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And Greg Cappelli, to my left, he is Chief Executive Officer of Apollo Education Group, one of the world's largest private education providers, and through its subsidiaries, Apollo Education Group offers educational programs and services throughout the world. We have a couple of other panelists, and we'll introduce them in a few minutes. So again, welcome Jonas and Greg, and thanks for being here today, here in a rainy Washington, D.C. As leaders in both of your sectors, we just want to start out very basically here today. We know we're talking about the workforce, we're talking about the economy, we're talking about all the stakeholders and all of that. What are the trends that you're seeing, Jonas, that make this topic particularly relevant and critically important?
Well, when we think about labor markets and have thought about labor markets for decades, we really think about labor markets primarily being impacted by economic cycles. So when the economy is good, unemployment goes down, and when the economy is not so good, unemployment goes up. And that used to be what moved, people in and out of work. But what we've started to observe across the US as well as globally is that the labor markets are starting to be impacted by structural changes. So big changes that are impacting across economic cycles and also across countries. So things like technology driving a need for higher skilled workforce. Demographics, an aging workforce, so baby boomers retiring and new young people coming into the workforce. Companies behaving in different ways as they are grappling with an environment that is more uncertain, more volatile, affected by local events, but also other events, far away from where they may be based. And then last but not least, generational changes. So millennials and younger generations looking at work and looking at jobs for life in a very different way than prior generations. So all of those structural changes are now starting to impact labor markets, and that means they start to behave in different ways than what we're used to dealing with, and also, of course, putting a lot of strain onto educational institutions, onto organizations, and onto individuals, and really raising tensions in a number of areas.
Greg, you're scene setter. What's going on out there?
Well, I think my industry, the higher education industry, is having to transform itself to help deal with some of the things that Jonas is talking about, not only domestically but internationally. I mean, the statistics are just phenomenal. Over half of the jobs that we currently know of today are going to change dramatically over the next decade. Are we really prepared to deal with that? I'm passionate, we're passionate about, at Apollo, about this notion that there are 5 million jobs literally that employers are looking to fill, and they can't do it in our economy and in our job market in the US. There's something wrong with that. And I think what I'm very passionate about is higher education needs to work more closely with employers, with companies like Manpower and others who employ millions and millions of people, to make sure that we understand what their needs are, that we are, along with absolutely critical basic training and fundamentals that we have to provide students with, whether they're just in training programs or all the way up through master's degree programs, that they have a skill, also the skills necessary to get the jobs today and tomorrow, because those jobs are different. You walk through an auto plant and see if you see anybody manually doing any labor. It's machines, it's computers, and their skill set for those jobs are completely different. We are seeing companies all over this country, all over the world, who have a problem and need to reskill their labor forces in order to compete in what is now a very global labor market pool. So if we don't do it here, it's going to happen, and we're seeing examples of this in different places around the world. So we're spending a lot of time at Apollo trying to figure out the best way we can collaborate with employers all over the world to close this skills gap. It will add trillions of dollars to GDP.
Trillions.
Trillions.
And so, you know, the new normal in the U.S. has been basically a 2% GDP rate. If we were to solve this problem, you could get above that.
There are many studies that are showing that if you close the skills gap, and there are a lot of components to doing it, so you're upskilling America, that you're going to be very significantly adding to the GDP of this country. And all you have to do, I've probably had the pleasure of meeting probably 25% of Fortune 500 executive teams, and their issues are clear. You know, when they're telling us they can get cheap financial capital basically all over the world. Now that might change, but right now you can't. And their biggest struggle for growth is filling key position with talent that actually sticks around and doesn't leave, because we know how, you know, Jonas can talk about the turnover in this country, that sticks around, is passionate, and does a great job. The numbers are stunning. Over 50% of the time, they go through this entire hiring process, right? Whether it's job boards all the way up through executive search, or 50% of the time, they're not getting a positive IRR on the dollar spent in that area. We have to come together to fix that. And that's going to mean educators listening and working more closely with employers like Manpower and others.
So you two are on either side of me, but you're coming here to talk about a common problem. How is it that you two are working together or want to solve this problem together? One might not see you as natural allies in this world, Jonas.
Well, when you think about all the changes that are happening, and both of us, both Apollo Group as well as Manpower Group, are really seeing organizations struggle with finding people with the right skills. And we've seen employer behavior change over time. And you know, with the decline of the traditional, you know, employment model, the 40-hour week, and the increasing use of other forms of employment, be they part-time, be they temporary work, crowdsourcing, you know, the gig economy, freelancers, all of those have taken a larger part of the workforce and how work gets done in this country as well as elsewhere. Organizations are increasingly behaving in a way where they're leveraging their organization as workforce platforms, and they're consuming labor. So they're consuming labor and they're not creating talent. And we believe that that equation has to change. And in a few weeks from now, we're going to publish our latest talent shortage survey, where we ask employers, you know, what skills are hard to find and where do they find them hard to find. And just from a year ago, twice as many employers today are saying that they are starting to take this notion of creating their own talent pipeline very, very seriously. Because just as Greg said, they know that they will not be able to execute their business strategy if they don't have the talent in place. And of course, with our ability to work with hundreds of thousands of employers, and Greg, with his ability to deliver content in innovative ways and really be at the forefront of educational technology usage, combining our abilities and doing this in a way that we think is more indicative of how education has to happen in the future, which is very iterative. Because this notion that we finish 12 years of education or 15 years of education and that we're then graduate ready, many employers say, no, that's true, you are graduate ready, but you're not work ready. And we have jobs that require people to come in and be productive from day one. We believe that one of the ways of solving that is to make sure that the connection between employers and, you know, future employees is much closer also during school, and that you can really earn and learn in combination. And that way, you truly become work ready and able to participate more fully in the workforce when you've completed a part of your education.
So Greg, you two have common goals. As I said, might not be immediately obvious to people why it is you want to work together on this, but why is it that you and Manpower both feel so strongly about this together?
Well, one, Jonas is a great CEO, and I have learned a lot from working with Manpower over the years in different capacities. You've got, one of the largest staffing companies in the world that's global, and you've got one of the largest educators in the world that's global. I mean, we have 1 million graduates working somewhere in the economies. And now we're learning different methodologies, all over the world. And again, you think about Manpower and Apollo, I think the reason we came together was, Jonas is trying to be very competitive by putting talented, strong employees into companies, which it's their lifeline, it's their life, bread to grow and to continue to outperform their competitors. And he's realizing, as we do, that the competitive advantage you have is making sure you're doing a better job at that people are more prepared, that they have these skills to do the jobs. It is a huge cost to the economy to have to retrain in certain areas for skills that you should have when you're coming out of programs. Mm-hmm. We're learning things in different parts of the world, as I said. A big topic in this country, you can't go a single week and not hear about college debt, over $1 trillion. We're learning how to potentially solve that in places like Germany, different model. They have apprenticeships, right, that are more advanced than been doing for years. But think about this. Our students there are going to school for a week at a time. Then they're taking a week and they're working for an employer or company. And they're learning a skill. And then they go back to school for a week. They're alternating. And over a course of 2 to 3 years, they're coming out because the employer is paying for it with no debt. The employer is getting a direct influence on the student's outcome, right? Everybody, and there's no taxpayer bill. So everybody wins in that situation. So together, we're trying to figure out ways that we can solve a huge problem in the U.S. at less of a cost to taxpayers and the government.
So Jonas, when we talk about how, quote unquote, tight the job market is, some people will say, well, if workers are short in a region or a sector, all an employer needs to do is pay more. Mm-hmm. But what I'm hearing from you two is it's not as simple as that, because you need to have a qualified worker to hire, right?
That's right. So you have a number of structural changes that have really upended the traditional supply and demand model. Because you're absolutely right, Mark. Just as what you described, the classical theory was that if there's a shortage of workers, if you increase wages, then more people will flock to that occupation, and you will balance the need. And we think that, first of all, the evolution of the skills and how quickly the skills needs are evolving. So we know that in 2030, 65% of the jobs that our Generation Z is going to be working on aren't even invented yet. So it's hard to keep up with that rapid change. But also, the transparency on wages, not only in the US, but globally, is complete. And with the help of technology, companies today aren't limited to their geographical region within, a county or a state or a country. If wages are moving up too quickly, very, very soon, you are able to move work to other places geographically. So that acts as a dampening effect on wage inflation. And as you well know, wage inflation has been low over the return of this cycle, but not only in the US, everywhere. So both productivity and wages have not evolved the way we traditionally would have expected them to behave as labor markets are getting tighter. And we believe that this ability to get work done in different ways, companies really thinking of themselves as workforce platforms, is one of the reasons why there is a dampening effect on wages, because at a certain point in time, you will be compelled to stay competitive to get work done in a different way so that your consumers or your businesses are still buying your products and your services.
Anything to add real quickly as we wrap this piece up?
It's a great point, because let me give you a perfect example. You're going to go to where you can get the best labor to do the best job. In America, we should be concerned that we led many, many categories in education for many years. We came out of the late 1800s, and for decades, every decade, we were adding a full year of school to people's lives every decade, right? We get to the 50s, 60s, we're out educating the world, the GI Bill, everything plays into that. Fast forward to today, global labor markets. Let's just think America for a minute here. I have to think about the fact that in South Korea, 2/3 to 70% of their labor force over the age of 25 has a bachelor's degree. Now, we all know that not everybody has to have that level of education, and in fact, there are lots of opportunities to train people from welding on in this, in this country, and we've dropped the ball a little bit there too. But you have to be mindful that other emerging economies, right, are doing, they understand that the power to the labor markets is education and training. They got it. So now we have China, South Korea, India, different places that are scaling up. Got to think about that for job creators in this country, because it's actually going to move the needle, and we need to compete there. And it's going to take innovation from organizations like these two coming together and others that we're talking to today to actually move the needle enough so that we can improve GDP in this country.
Which is something I think everybody would like to see happen. Well, let's broaden this out now a bit, and we are now joined by the three other members of our panel. We'll begin with those introductions. Dale Jones, who is President and CEO of Diversified Search, Rebecca Haley, Vice President of Human Resources for Genesis Healthcare, and Gerri Mason Hall, Chief Human Resource Officer for Sodexo. So Dale, we're going to start with you. You have a broad view across many Fortune 500 companies. We know how many companies are included in that group. From your unique perspective, what steps are you seeing leaders, managers taking to develop a so-called right skilled workforce, not only now but anticipating their needs in the future? And is there sufficient momentum in that direction?
Well, Mark, the major Fortune 500 companies have been grappling with the issue of the war for talent for many years. McKinsey published a study in 1997, almost 20 years ago, about the shortage of talent. But a lot of the data did not include the shortage of technology talent and talent around innovation. And so that's been exacerbated. So what's happening now is corporations are having to retool their own employees through internal training programs to bring them to a place where they can compete in the marketplace. And we've seen that happen in spades. We've also seen them join initiatives like STEMconnector, where you convene both business and educational leaders together to say, how do we get ahead and solve the problem of skilled labor in technology and creating innovative leaders in the marketplace. So many companies are doing it internally, and some of them are getting involved in other initiatives that bring them together with the educational community and the Fortune 500 community to dialogue and really work on strategies to say, we've got to get ahead of this before we realize that we don't have the talent we need to really produce the products or the services that are needed.
So would you say there's a close to global observation that this needs to happen, or are there still some people who are late to the party to understand that they need to be more aggressive about training?
I think most leaders realize that this is a heightened issue and we're at a crisis point around the need to upscale and rescale talent in a major way. And when you've got a certain preponderance of talent in one part of the country and you've got thousands of companies in other parts of the country, folks are saying, how do I get that talent here? And we're feeling the pinch of global countries outside the U.S. looking for talent here. They're sourcing talent here when we need it as well. And so I think most CEOs are really focused on the need to upscale and rescale. And the question is, who gets there faster in order to win on the talent war?
Briefly, are there some sectors doing a better job than others?
I think we're finding, particularly in the manufacturing world, where you've got to have people with hands-on talent in these areas. The life sciences area around technology and innovations around consumer medicines and consumer health, the digitization of health records. So healthcare is moving in this direction in many ways, and we're seeing people come out of the Phoenixes of the world where they come with these skills to be able to engage in a competitive marketplace.
Okay, well, let's move on now to Rebecca. Rebecca, thank you for being here today. What about Genesis Healthcare? What are you seeing there, or where do things stand?
Yeah. So Genesis is a healthcare company. We're in long-term care, and what we see is our clinicians, we pride ourselves on education. I mean, that's really the priority for us. And we expect all of our therapists and assistants and nurses to really make sure that they keep their skill level up to meet the requirements of their licenses. And what we do internally is we have a number of accredited clinical and non-clinical courses that we offer to everyone in the company. They're offered online, and everyone has access to it. So we really try to keep it in-house and make sure we provide the education and training for our staff.
Okay. And last but not least, Gerri Mason Hall from Sodexo. Tell us, first of all, about Sodexo. Not everybody might be aware of what that organization is, and then what your experience is with some of these issues that you just heard about.
Yes, thank you, Mark. We are a global, we employ over 400,000 employees worldwide, but we are an integrated facilities service organization focusing on quality of life services to millions of consumers that we serve every day. Here in the U.S., we grew primarily, Mark and I were discussing this earlier, primarily as a food service organization. And so you might pause and say, okay, well that labor should be cheap and prevalent in the U.S. But interestingly, we're having the same experience that you've already heard described. And as we focus on growth, what are these jobs going to look like for the future? You'd be surprised the emphasis on technology, digitization, just as was previously mentioned, but we're looking at ease and efficiency for our employees. So how can they perform their job in a better way, and heavy emphasis on technology. Quick example that I think you'll appreciate from the healthcare arena is we focus on cleaning a facility. And so you'd say, okay, that's janitorial, but not really. In that environment, it's critical that we make sure that, you know, it's germ-free environment, and that's part of the core for that hospital location. So we've engaged, we have technology for our employees to use to create that environment and support those partners that we have.
So let's now come back to the two gentlemen we started with. Jonas, so what are you seeing from your perspective with what you're hearing here from both ManpowerGroup and also from a client perspective in these areas?
Well, so clearly what we're seeing and what we're hearing is that organizations are looking for people with the right skills, and they're finding it, you know, difficult to meet that need. And what we are increasingly seeing is organizations starting to take responsibility, just as you gave an example of earlier, Rebecca, and also you, Gerri, in terms of creating their own talent pipeline. But we also think it's really important, you know, that you know, individuals take a responsibility in this area, because this is not episodical. This is going to be their lives as technology starts to evolve ever faster. So this notion of learnability, the desire and ability to keep on learning and upskilling during the course of one's career is going to become increasingly important, because it's difficult for employers to predict with any precision, and data will tell you that that's correct, you know, what is going to be the next big wave of demand. But what that means is that individuals will also have to be able to participate and have that notion of learnability and truly participate themselves in a much more active way in shaping their careers. And that's why when we talk about millennials, one of the comments you hear often is that they're not loyal to their employers. They move jobs much more often. Well, you know, they don't have any different attitude, and we conducted a very big survey with millennials, 30,000 millennials across 10 countries. Their general attitudes towards a predictable life and security and safety are very much the same that we see across other generations. However, they're looking at a labor market and an environment where the jobs for life are gone, and the only way for them to guarantee success, a successful life and a successful career, is to make sure that they have the right skills. So they look at employers as one of the criteria of choosing an employer is, you know, what kind of upskilling opportunities do I have with that employer, and what are the prospects for growth? And if they find that that prospect for growth isn't there, they are more willing to move to ensure really their own employability. And that's going to be one of the challenges for organizations. They will need to adopt that philosophy so that they are an organization that develops their talent, because that's a very, very big and important tool to attract skilled people into their organization, attract and retain skilled people into their organization.
So Greg, I want to get your reaction to that, and I see that Gerri is eagerly wanting to react as well over there.
Well, I'll just point out, I mean, Jonas, in the staffing business, whether temp, perm, different levels, It's a competitive business just like ours. If I'm a really smart, talented future employee, am I going to go try to join an organization like Manpower, who is literally going to invest into an education for me if I follow the right path and do the right things and I'm a loyal employee and it's not going to cost me anything? Or am I going to jump to some other situation who hasn't communicated to me clearly how they're going to make an investment in my life and my future? We're listening to those things and we're hearing them. Our challenge is to make sure that we react to the needs very quickly of what they're telling us that they need, and we can train those skills. I'll just point one other point to make about this global economy that we're in. STEM is probably the most used term you hear in education today. Everything's about STEM. And these emerging economies will produce 16 million STEM grads annually. That's 5 times more than we will in developed countries. It's not that hard to figure out why that's happening, right? That is the fuel that is going to be used to generate growth country by country. And all you have to do is look at the countries that are doing that well and look at their growth rates. Other outside factors are going to weigh into the global economies, right, the system, but this is a big one. And I think it's very telling what's happening.
Yeah, so Mark, you're absolutely right. I was smiling as Jonas spoke because not only do we know this information from studies, but internal within Sodexo, we regularly measure our engagement, and that is a huge component. Are we creating a learning environment? Are we supporting the growth? And in Sodexo, part of our culture is that the individual owns their career. We're there to support and facilitate, but you own it. And part of that is offering, using partners, because we can't do it all alone. We don't do everything internally, but partners, and including organizations like STEMconnector. Dale mentioned the variety of organizations we tap into to help guide us. But absolutely, all of our generations, but especially the millennials, are looking, where are you helping me to continue to grow? And I will stay engaged and committed to the organization.
Yeah, I like to tell young people, or even people who are mid-career, is you need to own your brand, and part of that is taking command of your own career. We're going to move next to Dale and Rebecca. So the question now becomes, Dale, how important is culture in developing a workforce, not only now but in the future? And so along those lines, using the word that Jonas is teaching us to use, learnability, how do you build the culture of learnability within an organization from the top?
Well, it's often said that culture triumphs strategy any day, and it starts at the top of leaders setting the right tone about what's really important in an organization to move it forward, to develop its people, particularly when you say people are the greatest assets of the business. But the question is, what does that look like? How is that flow in the organization in terms of leadership development and training, career pathing for upward mobility, the kind of values that are inculcated in the business? And so culture is key, and if we're going to win the war in rescaling the labor force, it's got to be around the vision of the leadership, around setting a culture of excellence, a culture of performance, and a culture of investing in employees so that you get the best out of them every day in the marketplace. The studies show that 70% of the fastest growing occupations today are going to require math and science. 70%. That's a clarion call for organizations to develop a culture that now begins to say, how do we develop the people internally and hire the people and invest in organizations that will be producing people who have the math and science requirements that are needed.
Rebecca, same question.
And I agree with him. I think that companies have to look at their staff, assess what their skills are, and as they continue to grow and develop, what can they do to reconcile those two things? How do I make sure that the staff I have now have the skill set to meet my needs as a company in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? That's how you retain staff, and that's how you keep them engaged. And I think the companies that don't do that are going to lose employees. For Genesis, we have a lot of competition for our therapists and our nurses, so we have to be offering something that's different to make sure that they stay with us. And you know, we've been talking about the STEMconnector group here in DC. They're an amazing group. And for us, we're a company of women. You know, our therapists, our nurses are primarily women. So to connect and form a partnership with the STEMconnector group is great for us, because it gives us a chance to introduce young women to STEM careers, but also introduce them to Genesis. And what our hope is right now they might not be in the talent pipeline, but in 5 years or 10 years when they're graduating and they're looking for a job, I'm hoping they're going to look at Genesis.
Dale, I'm sorry, did you want to jump in?
Math is the number one reason people drop out of school. They hit math, it just goes straight up into the right.
So how can you compel them to stay in school if that's the thing that most people need to learn?
You have to make math engaging. You have to play games with kids, right, so that they get engaged, and with adults. I mean, you have kids who are in their teens that will sit in front of their Madden football games and Xbox if you don't put food under the door, they'll starve, right, because they're so engaged. You need that kind of engagement when you're teaching subjects like math, and actually you can do it. It's happening, it's being developed. Adaptive learning, you need to figure out, are you a visual learner, are you an audio learner, are you kinesthetic, do you want to touch it and feel it? If you can start to incorporate those things in, you will engage people. There's only a little over a 50% graduation rate in the nation. Right? College, there's a reason for that. People get busy, life gets in the way, but they're confused, and it's hard, and it's because it's not engaging in the right way. So our concern is making sure to solve your problem, right, with math and STEM, that we do it in a way that will engage people to stick with it.
Gerri?
So I think that one of the things that we've been discussing, because part of a number of our partners are K through 12, and in addition, we tend as employers to focus on the higher education, but Greg is spot on. We have to capture early, and so pre-K through first grade, really introducing why would I like math? How is it fun? Much like the First Lady did with healthy eating, and making it fun, getting the little children involved in growing, and then enjoying that. So focusing on math super early, that's what we're doing with a lot of our partners at K through 12.
Jonas, we talked a lot about the world, and we talked about the U.S. having perhaps some specific challenges. So is this a unique American problem / challenge, this one of attracting top talent, and how do you view the unique challenges within the United States versus the rest of the world?
You know, what's interesting is that labor markets used to be highly local. So, events really in a labor market were determined by what happened within that country and the country's economy and the industries within that country. And of course, we now live in a global world. But what is very clear is that these structural drivers are impacting all countries. So all of the developed world has really seen a bifurcation in the workforce between those that have the skills and those that do not have the skills, which is also playing itself out in terms of the haves and the have-nots and how you feel about your prospects in the future. So you can see that in the political process, not only in our country right now, you see exactly the same occurring across other nations in the developed world. For the emerging world, it's a little bit different, but the same things manifest themselves because emerging markets, to try and compete in a global market, just as Greg is describing, they are acquiring products and services from the Western world, from the developed countries, which means their skill levels are high. And they're much higher than what the overall population and the education level of the population is, which drives very, very rapid wage inflation. So when you wonder why suddenly some kinds of jobs are coming back that previously left the US and they're coming back, it's because 15 years of double-digit wage inflation for manufacturing skills in Southeast China means that between that and 6 weeks on a boat, it means we can now compete very effectively with the skilled workforce here in the United States. So it may feel as if this is really a US issue, but it's very much a global issue that transcends borders, it transcends industries, and we are in a competitive environment. As the US, we compete against all the other countries that are seeing exactly the same trends occurring And they are taking very determined action in terms of upgrading the number of people with digital skills, preparing their workforce of the future, making sure that STEM is part of their curriculum. And they are competing with us as nations. And they're competing with us as nations because that's where employers go. They will go to places where work can be done and where they know that they have access to a skilled workforce.
Dale, any reaction on this question of U.S. compared to or versus the world?
Yes, Jonas is exactly right. We are so intertwined in terms of our objectives to find people. We have a client that's in sub-Saharan Africa today, and they're sourcing engineering talent from the U.S. because they're about to go public in the telecommunications space. And so it's a great example of while we have great needs for engineering talent here, the rest of the world needs it as well. And so we're literally in a global village, whether we admit it or not. And it's those companies that align business and education and have some level of intentionality that will win, because you've got to be out in front of this and investing in education and investing in STEM talent in order to win the game. But we're all interlinked. There's whatever we say, we're all together, and folks are looking for talent everywhere.
Anybody want to jump in on that?
You know, to add on to that, because that's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing organizations who might be based out of a certain country, but they're not just getting the talent in that country, right? They're getting it from many different places. And I think it's incumbent upon educators, right? And all the way from training through post-secondary, as I pointed out before. Regulators, right? Accreditors who are writing lots of rules around ways that are acceptable for you to educate. And then businesses, the employers are almost the new accreditors. They're only going to hire your graduates if you're producing for them, right? And the employers playing a much bigger role will lessen the burden on governments around the world. The educators have to modernize in a way that, again, they are doing things and producing graduates in a way that is consistent with what the employers are asking for. One quick example, we own a university in London that's a highly ranked law school called BPP. And I went into one of our classrooms there a couple of years ago, and there was a model taxi in the classroom. I said, this is a law school. What is there a taxi, doing in the classroom? And they said, well, listen, here's the reason why we have 60 or 70 exclusive arrangements with law firms in the country, because we listen to every single one of them every single day. And at one point, as one example, they were saying, you know what, one of our biggest issues is, the attorneys get in a taxi, and the young associate has the briefing documents, and they've got to go to the partner and have them briefed by the time they get to the client, right? And they don't do that very well. So we literally are simulating that for the client in the classroom. Sounds silly, but that's an example of how you tie all this together, and you train people in a way that need to be trained no matter what degree level they're at, so employers can plug them in. And again, I don't want to say it too many times, but that is the fuel, right, for getting the labor markets moving and the economy going.
So we've heard of elevator pitches. Now we know about taxi briefings. So we learned
yes, exactly.
something about that today. So I think we've touched on this a little bit, but we talked about skills, but maybe just to break that out a little bit. In terms, we're trying to assess right now what the skills are needed, but yet we know that we live at a time when change is occurring at a rate that seems as if it's more rapid than any time, perhaps in human history. So, first of all, do we not have to acknowledge that perhaps we don't know as much as we would like to know about what we're anticipating? And then, secondly, what can we do to prepare people for the fact that we don't know these things, Jonas?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that cognitive skills are going to become more important. Technology will have a significant impact, and we know, although some jobs are going to be certainly affected by the evolution of technology and maybe eliminated, wholesale, just as it has been the case in the history of work. Most jobs are not going to be eliminated, but they're going to be very significantly impacted by those technological changes. And preparing the workforce of the future, in understanding how they acquire new skills as they go on, because they can't adapt. They can't, it's very difficult to forecast and foresee what it's going to be, is going to be critical. And our view, and this is exactly what we're doing together with Apollo Group and Western International Universities, we have a program called MyPath, which is really, asking people to participate and give them the opportunity to get a free education while working. So this iterative notion, and I know there are many organizations and increasingly data is showing that the closer you connect young people early on, just as Gerri said, early on, as early as possible with working life while they're going to school, the more likely it is that they're going to be employed. So 4 touches with somebody going through K through 12 means that they're 5 times more likely to be employed when they come out into working life.
What does that mean, 4 touches?
So 4 touches, a intervention or an ability to participate in real work, going to, through an apprenticeship program, an internship program, or participating in a project. Any way that you can get young people to participate already early on in working life and give them, and distill into them already a desire to learn more. Maybe this gives them a good idea what they're suited for, but also very much what they're not really interested in. Really, really helps ensure that they choose educational paths that are more appropriate for their skills and interests, but also teaches them that this notion of learning new skills, their ability and their desire to do that, needs to be fostered at an early age, because that's the only way we're going to be able to keep moving and upskilling our workforce as we go forward.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about the growing number of options of education that are available to people, many of those online, but even with the changes in technology, we're still seeing some division or polarization of opportunity that's based on economic well-being or social background. So the question ultimately, which probably gets to another question, which is who pays. Well, what can be done to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to build these skills that either we know right now are needed or we're trying to anticipate are needed now and in the future? Greg.
Well, that's why our founder, 45 years ago built Apollo. I mean, you couldn't go to night school. You couldn't, if you weren't going to traditional school in the 60s and 70s, you weren't going to school. You were going to go during the day. If you had a job, too bad. If you had kids, too bad. And the only reason I bring that up is think of the economic output that's wasted. 2/3 of most college students are women today. Knowledge is power, right? If we went into the inner cities and we took all that brain power, I'm from Chicago where all these murders are happening, and this, don't want to get into politics here at all, but if you could educate, right, and transform, it is unbelievable amounts. It's like energy and power found in this nation where we could start out competing others again. So I look at it as everybody, on this stage has said, the industry is changing rapidly, business is changing rapidly. It is definitely global. How do we do the best job that we can, making sure we're identifying where the needs are, then training, not just the same way we did 40 years ago. We created the first online programs and the first hybrids and different things. Now it's moving to yet another new model to be more inclusive, where you can learn anywhere you basically want and on your time. And if you're willing to put in the work, right, even though we're going to make it more and more engaging, then you are going to be competitive in the world, right? You just have to have the ability and the data to know what skills do I need, where can I apply them, what is the best opportunity for me, let me find my passion, because that's why people change jobs 11 to 15 times, right? You start putting these things together, and then some new things we're working on where you can simulate those skills to employers in a different way up front before you get hired. You're going to have a much better running engine to fuel the economy.
Virtual reality part of that?
Without question. Totally convinced that within a couple of years, maybe even at our schools, you'll see students in some areas. I don't think you ever replace great teachers, but you're going to see engaging ways to learn. In our health classes, you'll probably be inside the human body looking at things in a virtual environment. It is coming.
Very good. Jonas, reaction?
Yeah, no, I think Greg is absolutely right. This is going to be fundamental for certainly businesses, certainly for individuals who could, really participate in a more meaningful way. But in the end also, this is something that we need to address, because this is going to be the societal issue of our times. We're seeing the early stages of this because we think we're in the early stages of this transformative time. And if we don't find ways to address this in different ways than what we've tried to address it in the past, this is going to become a more bifurcated workforce, a more divisive environment, in our own country. And what we know is that in the end, that is not going to lead to the prosperity and the opportunity that we wish to have for everyone. So the ability for everyone to participate in society, being meaningfully employed, gainfully employed, being productive, feeling as if they are contributing to society, is fundamental for the well-being of our nation. And that is really the issue at hand. From the company that can't find the people they need with the right skills, that is certainly a very important aspect, but this is a societal issue that we need to address. And I think our collaboration stems from a desire to really address that in different ways, in scalable ways, so that we can show and lead the way in illustrating how we can innovate and create new paths to prosperity for millions of people that are today underemployed, outside of the labor market, or just want to find paths for themselves as they want to participate, and feel good about the future and their prospects.
So Dale, the data, the science tells us that STEM opportunities are perhaps the ones that we really need to be paying more attention to. How are we going to encourage prospective employees or students to pay attention to that and walk down that path that Jonas is talking about?
Well, the good news is that the way forward is we're part of a STEMconnector movement right now, where companies and institutions are coming together and collaborating about how do we get better at this. The other thing is that some corporations have taken on mentoring programs like Million Women Mentors that was spawned by STEMconnector, where corporations are saying, we want to educate, we want to mentor hundreds of women who've dropped out of the STEM world and come alongside of them and get them engaged, and those that are in to remain engaged as engineers and technicians, et cetera. So part of the way forward, Mark, is where we are today, and we're involved in the movement. We just need to give it strength, and we need to create greater alignment between business and education on what the outcome should be when it comes to what we need as a society around the whole STEM world and the future.
Rebecca, that's right in your sector there.
Yeah, it is, and I think, to earlier points made this morning, I think that we need to find a way to start much earlier with children. I don't think we can wait until they're in college or in high school to really have those conversations. I think the earlier we can start introducing them, and I even see with my children who are in elementary school, they have STEM programs after school. So to your point, Greg, about making it fun and active, they have after school programs that are introducing them to STEM careers in a fun, active way, so they don't think that they're doing math. Right. They don't think they're doing science, but it's a way to introduce them. And to your point about the 4 touches, that's one of the first touches. So hopefully by the time they get in middle school or high school and they're thinking of careers, they can move into those sectors and those type of industries.
So we want to look into the future a little bit. Jonas, I'm told by 2025, it may be the fact that, and this seems like a lot of challenges, particularly for those of us that are getting older, we can expect to have as many as 5 generations in the workforce at a time. As all these demographics shift, that's going to be a burden also for employers, right? So how will they need to respond and adapt to that to accommodate, the further iterations of baby boomers, millennials, and on down the line?
It does pose a significant organizational challenge, because organizations tended to be, tended to think of themselves as a place where you come and you do the work and then you leave, the cohesiveness culturally within that cohort was high. But today we have 4 generations at work and heading towards 5 generations at work with very different expectations. But we believe that society is generally moving to a one-size-fits-one approach, where individuals are used to shaping their lives, shaping their preferences, consuming in ways that fit them and their lifestyles. And one of the challenges that organizations are going to be facing is how to satisfy that need so they can attract and retain, the new and incoming generations of workers, but at the same time, of course, motivate and retain those that are already, part of their organization. So we think you'll see a lot more, activities around self-service, so individuals being able to choose when and how they want to work. We've talked a lot about the ability to work from home, making it easier for parts of the workforce to participate, although they, because they don't have to commute in the same ways. The ability to choose different levels of benefits and what kind of benefits somebody would like to have for a certain stage in their lives. So it's going to be much more open in terms of the various choices that individuals can make, and organizations have a big challenge in doing that, but they will, because it is going to be necessary to retain and attract individuals into their organizations.
So Gerri, I'm thinking about the fact that one of the things that happened in the wake of the financial crisis and Great Recession is many people found that they didn't have sufficient retirement savings, and so an older cohort of the workforce remains engaged with the workforce. Perhaps they didn't anticipate that. I can imagine those are some of your employees as well. So that's a recent representation of this blending of younger and older, and it may become more so if things continue along the lines of we're all getting older and live longer. So talking about the problem and challenges that Jonas just talked about, how are you adapting to that, and how do you anticipate those future changes?
So Jonas is spot on. We actually have a 2025 strategy, and a big part of that is our emphasis on quality of life. With that is personal development. With that is looking at the consumerization, if you will, of our workforce. So that one size fits one is the approach we're taking, where individuals, we're looking at all of those generations, and it's the individual's choice. So they're accustomed on their daily basis of being consumers. Everything we do, we go on Amazon, whatever it is, and we are able to choose. You come in the workplace, you should be able to choose and accommodate your life and make sure you have a strong quality of life. So that's the approach we're already taking, emphasizing the social interaction among those many generations, the personal development, owning your individual career. All of these things are part of our focus on quality of life and our strategy for 2025 growth.
Brief thought there, Greg?
Well, I agree with what was just said, and there's examples all over the place. For example, Germany does it very well, where they're going, 10-year-olds are learning about careers, they're going to work, they're getting opportunities to do apprenticeships in their teens. Bit of a different model. They're starting to do this in the UK in a bigger way. Maybe that finds its way here in certain ways, maybe in a virtual way, virtual apprenticeship program. But it is that connection of helping individuals find their passion for what they want to do, and also to understand what they have to learn to get a good job. The number one degree I might add in this country is psychology right now. Nothing against that. We need good psychologists, but the number one degree, right? And that's, you think about where the masses are and the jobs are in STEM, so on and so forth. We've got to do a better job there. And I think we're figuring out solutions and ways to work together to get that done.
Okay, well, we're going to start to wrap things up a little bit here, and I'm going to ask everybody to give us a closing thought in a moment or two, but let me go next to sort of the final question, and that is for Jonas. What would you like to see happen to help accommodate these needs, to help America get the skills it needs over the next, there's a range of time spans we could look at, the next 2 years, the next 20 years. It's a broad time span, obviously encompassing the changes that we can't yet anticipate. What do we need to do in that time span?
Well, first of all, I think although we've been through changes like this in the past, nothing is predetermined. So right now, we can shape our future by taking deliberate actions as a society, as organizations, and as individuals. And the areas where we think we should intervene is everything that we can do to make future generations ready for work. So younger generations, K through 12, having those early interventions, early opportunities to be exposed to work life is going to be extremely important. Then we move into people who are already in the workforce, and there we need to create an environment where upskilling becomes part of our daily activity for organizations and individuals alike. And last but not least, integrating, so nurturing diversity is going to be extremely important, because organizations are going to be looking for people. Demographic changes means there are less people in our country, and we need to do everything that we can to bring all of the individuals in our society to participate in the workforce, because we need them. We need them to be productive. And from an economic reason, from a societal perspective, it's important. So those are really the three areas: ready to work, making sure we upskill individuals when they have left school on a more continuous basis, and then also making sure we tap into all of those talent pools that are going to be so vital for our future economic growth and prosperity.
Greg, your wish list for the next 2 to 20 years.
Well, my wish list is to make sure that we take everything we've learned talking to many of the greatest employers in the world and employ those ideas and share them with others in higher education. It's going to look completely different within 5 to 10 years in higher education. I think the cost will come down. There'll be more opportunity for all people. It will be more engaging. And I think that if we get that component right, we can provide a better life for a lot of people. So my wish list is to make sure that we're taking the examples of partnerships and different ways certain institutions are educating around the world. We learn from that. We employ it quickly here. We use the latest digital technologies. We need to plan as a country in that area. And I have no doubt in my mind we can get back to, at least here, being the leader in education, not just K-12, which is critical, but in all the higher education areas as well. And you can't try to do it in one way. I think higher education institutions have learned that. We're doing things from 3-month coding boot camps where students are getting together all day, every day for 3 months. Very, very smart kids, and coming out and getting jobs for $60,000, $70,000 a year. They don't want to go to school for 4 years. So I think you have to look at a myriad of different ways, right, to educate, work with the employers, and good things are going to happen.
We're going to work from the outside in, and we live in a generation of sound bites and Twitter-linked thoughts. So to the extent that we're trying to talk about teaching and education, what should we teach our audience today? The takeaways from what we're talking about. We'll start and end with, as in this closing segment, with Dale. Dale, what do we need to walk away with to remember better than anything else today?
Well, one is that the future is not linear, and we've got to reimagine the future if we're going to be successful in upskilling America's workforce. We've got to reimagine it in ways that we haven't in the past. And every company and every institution has to have a STEM strategy if it's going to compete in the global marketplace.
Rebecca, your Twitter-linked takeaway.
I think that upskilling is necessary and has to happen across the country with all employers, because if we don't, they're going to lose their talent. They've got to find a way to have a pipeline and a growth opportunity and strategy for their staff.
Gerri?
This conversation is about keeping America great, and it does not rest on any one of these entities. So it's not employers alone, it's not the search firms, it's not the educators, it's not the K through 12 teachers. Together we have to work at this, and it's top opportunities like today to come together and really look at this challenge. So again, I think we have to focus on integration partners like STEMconnector, emphasis on Million Women Mentors and the like, all of us together facing this challenge, and again, keeping America great.
Greg Cappelli.
I think that we need to continue to innovate and work together with the organizations who are the employers and who are driving new advances in innovation and technology. And as educators, we need to make sure we're right in the middle of that mix, because if we do that, I think that we're going to create millions of new jobs. And our passion at Apollo, again, let's close that 5 million to start with skills gap, and we'll create so much more after that.
Get that
we
GDP
right.
growth.
Yes.
Jonas?
Getting everybody to participate in an active and meaningful work life is really not only necessary for organizational health, but also for societal health. And right now, things are bifurcating, and we can do many, many things to bring this back to a place where we can really fulfill the promise of all of the young people as well as those that are currently here, to make sure they can make a contribution and feel good about their future.
A lot of work to do, a lot of food for thought. I want to thank our guests, and I'll mention them and recap their names for our audience again, beginning with Dale Jones, President and CEO of Diversified Search, Rebecca Haley, Vice President of Human Resources for Genesis Healthcare, Gerri Mason Hall, the Chief Human Resource Officer for Sodexo, and to my left, Greg Cappelli, CEO of Apollo Education Group, and last but not least, Jonas Prising, Chairman and CEO of ManpowerGroup. Thank you, all of you, for being here today, as well as those of you here in the room and those of you that joined us online. I'm Mark Hamrick with Bankrate.com. Thank you for joining us today.